Hello, Year 7, and in today's lesson I want to look at who was Bloody Mary, Henry's eldest daughter who took the throne after Edward had died. Our lesson objectives are going to be understanding why Mary was given this nickname and also trying to work out and evaluate if we think this nickname is deserved or not. Before we go any further, just to recap on the rules, first of all, can you make sure you've got this worksheet open from Google Classrooms to go along when I prompt you? You'll be required to submit this worksheet at the end. Please make sure you hit submit. Don't do brilliant work and then your teacher doesn't get a chance to see it. So show you've completed the lesson. And this needs to be submitted by Sunday, the 10th of May at 5 p.m. So we'll start off with Mary's childhood first of all. And as a child, Mary was loved by Henry. Now, he's very proud of her and once stated, "This girl never cries." It's possible that Henry devoted on Mary because at this time, Mary was Henry's only child. Catherine had been pregnant several times, as we looked at before. There had been miscarriages, all the children died very early on, but Mary was the survivor. Now, Catherine had started to realise that Mary might be the only child that she ends up producing. Mary might end up being the heir to the throne. And so from a young age, Catherine made sure that Mary was suitable to be an heir to the throne. And one way of seeing this is the fact that Catherine taught Mary Latin. Now, this was normally seen as a language only males would learn. But by doing so, Catherine was sending a message saying, look, my daughter is just as good as a man and my daughter can be heir to the throne one day. But all changes in 1531. This is when Catherine was banished from the royal court. Henry had finally had enough of his marriage. Mary was forbidden from seeing her mum ever again. And to make matters worse, her father was now changing the religion of England during this time. He was changing it from being Catholic to being Protestant. And this is something that haunted Mary. Mary was a devout Catholic. That's how she'd been raised. And people don't really just change religion halfway through. And so Mary was seeing her religion change completely. And it was at the hands of her father as well. And another person who she blamed was Anne Boleyn, who she felt had encouraged all of this, encouraged the divorce, and meant that she couldn't see her mother. We regularly see a hatred for Anne Boleyn from Mary. Now, of course, Henry marries Anne Boleyn, and by doing so he says that Mary is an illegitimate child, that Mary was born out of wedlock, and is basically announced to the whole of England. Mary was removed from being heir to the throne. She was no longer a princess, and she was sent to go and live with her stepsister Elizabeth, who now was a princess. So Mary has to stay and watch her baby stepsister essentially have the life she used to have. Henry doesn't really care too much about Mary anymore. That relationship has broken down, and they don't talk to each other for about 3 years. To make matters worse, in 1536, Catherine dies. Mary never got to see her mother again. And on top of it all, during this time period of 1531 to 1536, Mary is suffering from regular and severe stomach cramps that were probably caused by stress at the time. So, quite a lot to look at there with Mary's teenage years. Your first task is, look at this statement. Mary's teenage years were extremely tough for her. Can you just write a paragraph, please, on your worksheet, not just 1 or 2 lines, make it a decent amount of work, and I'm looking for detail that either agrees or disagrees with this statement. The blue slides should help if you need to replay any information. If you could pause the video here and press play when you've done that. Okay, moving on. So 1536 is a key year for Mary. Age 20, she wants to go and live in Spain, where her mother was born. She feels there's nothing here for her in England now. She wants to move to a Catholic country. But in the same year, Anne Boleyn was executed, and Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, encouraged Henry to talk to Mary, for the two of them to reconcile. And that happens. They make amends. But only on one condition, and Henry says, okay, you can only come back if you sign this piece of paper saying that you are an illegitimate child. Henry doesn't back down over this. Henry wants to make sure that Mary admits that she was born out of wedlock, that the wedding between Henry and Catherine didn't count at all. And so Mary has to sign this piece of paper. She's effectively bullied into it. And so whilst Henry and Mary do talk again, Mary has to watch her father bring more and more Protestant changes into England, and then her stepbrother Edward make these changes even more extreme. And by the time she takes the throne in 1551, she's angry, she's bitter. There's years of resentment there about how her father treated her, about Anne Boleyn encouraging that divorce, about the fact she's had to see her Catholic religion change completely. And she's intent on restoring England to be a Catholic country again. She's going to undo the work that her stepbrother, and her father put in to making England Protestant. She wants to reverse all of those changes to restore England to the one true faith. She thinks there's only one correct way to worship God, and that is the Catholic way. And she is determined to rescue England from sin. To do so, she'll need an heir to the throne. And so one of the first things she does is she marries King Philip of Spain in 1554. But this isn't some kind of Disney marriage based on love or anything like that. Far from it. Mary is attracted to Philip. Philip is not really attracted to Mary at all. He writes several documents that state that. This is basically a marriage based on politics and religion. It's a marriage based on politics because it means the two countries, England and Spain, are allies and they won't attack each other. And it's based on religion because now we can see the two countries working together to restore England back to Catholic ways. Spain, of course, being a deeply Catholic country at the time. But during this marriage, there is no child that Mary needs to continue the throne. Now, Mary does have signs of pregnancy, but they're either tumours or they're phantom pregnancies, where Mary is convinced that she is pregnant, she's convinced that she can feel a baby kicking, that she's putting on weight, but in actuality, this isn't happening at all. And when they realise this isn't the case, that Mary is not pregnant, Philip leaves, Philip goes back to Spain, and there are rumours of Philip having affairs at this time as well in his homeland, which upset Mary. Mary's got further problems as well because from 1555 she realises she'll need to be harsher to the Protestants in England. These Protestants had no intention of going back to being Catholic and taking up Catholic ways. They were convinced that they were correct, they were worshipping the right way, and if they'd worship a Catholic way, they would go to hell when they died. There's a clear divide there between the ways to be a Christian. Now, Mary had started to restore the Catholic faith back. She'd started to bring back the monasteries that Henry had got rid of. She'd started to bring back gold and decorations into the church. And she'd started to bring the Pope back. The Pope was now the head of the Church of England. She had restored that break from Rome. But if people were still being Protestant and they were still going against Mary's wishes, they were committing two crimes: treason and heresy. Now, they're two key terms. Let's recap those. Treason is going against the monarch or the leader of your country. Mary had said, we're a Catholic country. By being a Protestant, people were going against her wishes. Heresy is worshipping a different religion to your country or monarch. And again, Mary had said, we're a Catholic country, and the Protestants were ignoring this. They felt their way of worshipping was correct and the right way if you wanted to go to heaven when you died. And it became clear to Mary that she would have to treat these people harshly for these crimes if she was to maintain her authority. So what did she do? She burnt them alive. Now, there's a few reasons why she might have done this. First of all, there was a belief that fire would purify the soul. And so this Protestant was going to go to hell when they died. However, by burning them alive, the soul was purified and they would go to heaven instead. It's almost like you were doing them a favour. There was the idea that the flames would make the accused fear hell. As they were dying, they'd see these flames, they'd think, my goodness me, this is what eternity is going to be like for me in hell. And so they might ask for forgiveness before dying. They might ask to repent. When we say repent, that means basically say, I was wrong, I've been worshipping the wrong way, I am now a Catholic, essentially. And there was an idea that if they did this, they would go to heaven. People watched. The families were forced to watch as well. And the idea was they would be scared. This was a horrific thing to witness. And so they would never commit the crime. They would make sure that they were Catholic, that they weren't being Protestant, because they didn't want this to happen to them. And that is what we call a deterrence, when someone is put off committing an action. And the fourth reason is because it was a scary and agonizing punishment. Obviously, this wasn't pleasant at all, and you could be there for a very long time if the conditions weren't right. You could very slowly be burnt alive over a number of hours with people watching you. So, task 2. I'd like you to explain to me why Mary burned Protestants during her reign. Can you please bring these keywords into your paragraph? So I'm looking for treason, heresy, Catholic, Protestants, repent, and deterrence. If you can bring those words in accurately, this will make your work stand out even more. Try not to just copy and paste what I've put down on the previous slide. Bring it into your own words instead. That's what we're interested in looking at here. The information on the yellow slides should help you with this answer. Pause the video to complete the task and then press play to continue. Okay, so Mary was determined to cleanse England. She was determined to undo all of the work that Henry and Edward had put in. And she felt she was doing a good thing. She thought she was doing God's work. And so from 1555 to 1558, over 300 Protestants were burned. And that's not just men, that includes women as well, some pregnant women. No one was exempt at this point. And Mary could be very cruel as well. So one example of this is Thomas Cranmer. Now, I had mentioned him in our first lesson. You can see the slide there from that first lesson when I said that Henry was encouraged by powerful Protestant advisors to start a new church and to divorce Catherine. Thomas Cranmer was one of those people. Mary sees Thomas Cranmer as someone who told Henry to divorce Catherine, to marry Anne Boleyn. That Cranmer is responsible for the pain that Mary suffered from her childhood, the fact she couldn't see her mother again. And so when she takes to the throne, Cranmer is a Protestant who Mary targets. And Mary had basically said, you are going to be burnt alive for being a Protestant unless you repent. Cranmer did repent. Cranmer did say, I ask for forgiveness. I am now a Catholic. I don't want to die. And basically, as soon as he did that, Mary said, well, I don't think that's good enough. Even though that was the law, if you repent, you were meant to be forgiven. Mary said, that's not good enough for someone like you, and burnt him alive anyway. Cranmer had caused so much pain that Mary wanted him gone. It was powerful revenge. So it seems like Mary was harsh, especially if you look at this graph on the right of number of people burnt to death by each Tudor monarch. Mary is way ahead of Henry VIII, and she only reigns for 4 years as well, compared to Henry's 38. However, burning people wasn't the only form of execution during the Tudor times. And in total, Henry VIII had about 70,000 people killed during his reign. There wasn't an exact register that was taken. He just didn't burn them all. Sometimes people were beheaded. I mean, we discussed this before with how people were put to death. It wasn't just burning them back in Tudor England. But by now, Mary was facing a number of problems. There were these rumours that Philip was having affairs in Spain. Now, Philip did come back in 1557 for 4 months. They try again for a child, and Mary again thinks that she is pregnant. But once again, she's wrong. And again, we're not sure if whether this is tumours or whether this was a phantom pregnancy at the time. These burnings were not making her popular with some people in England who felt that it was too harsh. There were failed harvests in England that year, which meant that people were starving to death. There were illnesses like influenza being spread around. And England lost a part of France they had controlled for 211 years. It was the port of Calais. The French took control of that area, and Mary was seen as a bit of a failure because of this. So times were tough. But the main problem Mary had was the fact there was still no child. Mary was getting more and more ill and older, and her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth, who, let's remember, Mary despises. She represents everything Mary hates. She represents Anne Boleyn. She represents Protestantism, was next in line to the throne. And also, Mary hates Elizabeth because Elizabeth is everything that Mary is not. She is young, she is attractive, she's seen as charismatic. And again, it represents all of that pain that she went through in her childhood because the mother was Anne Boleyn. And Mary knew that all of the hard work, all of the effort that she'd put into undoing her father and her stepbrother's changes and returning England to being a Catholic country would be gone if Elizabeth took to the throne. Now, Mary tries to talk to Elizabeth and say, Swear to me that you will not change the religion back to being a Protestant. Swear to me you'll keep the Catholic ways. And Elizabeth basically says, I can't do that. I will do what my conscience tells me. Which essentially means, no, I'm going to make sure we're Protestant again as soon as you're gone. And sadly, it was said that Mary had visions of children as she was dying, children playing instruments. Possibly a regret from Mary that she couldn't have a child of her own to carry on the legacy that she had tried to build. And when she died, Philip said, I feel moderate grief for her, which really goes to show he didn't love Mary at all. Imagine that. Your wife dies and you say, I feel moderate grief for this. And it's quite sad in a way because Mary had, to a certain extent, loved him, and the two males in her life, Philip the husband and Henry the father, both never really loved Mary enough back. And for a sign of that is the fact that Mary would pretty much immediately start to try to marry Elizabeth as soon as she took the throne. Mary also wasn't buried with her mother, Catherine, as she'd wanted to be. Instead, Mary is buried in Westminster Abbey, underneath this tomb. And Elizabeth would join her when she died. The two sisters are buried side by side. Now, this tomb was built over their graves, this huge monument, but it's a monument to Elizabeth. It's not a monument to Mary. And in fact, the only mention of Mary is on this marble slab, which is a little bit away from the tomb, and that's it. So, task 3. Let's evaluate this lesson. Mary deserves to be called Bloody Mary. She had blood on her hands, she killed a lot of people, a lot of Protestants in a barbaric way. Or maybe think actually there's more to it than that. She wasn't that harsh a queen after all. I'd like to know what you think. Can you write me a paragraph based on your thoughts on this statement? Do you agree with it or do you disagree with it, and why? The information on the green slides will help you, so pause the video here and then press play to end this lesson. And that is it, Year 7, for this lesson. Thank you very much. Please can you make sure that that completed worksheet is submitted by the 10th of May at 5 p.m. Any feedback, email me at gbrown@stopsleyhighschool.co.uk. Your next lesson will be up on the 13th of May. Thank you so much for your hard work. Please make sure you're looking after yourself. Please make sure you're getting fresh air where you can. Take care and look after yourselves, guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.